I am Miki Rezentes, and I am going to talk about greasing the wheel of adoption. Now, I know you're very interested in me and my talk, but most importantly, we need to make buzz on social media. This is my Twitter handle. I won't be doing a Q&A section at the end, but I will be engaging with anything on Twitter. Make sure you tag the conference, and so we can get people wanting to be here next year. I want to give a big thank you to, sorry, I forgot to start my timer, and you don't want that. I want to give a big thank you to Jim and everyone who's helping get the conference up. It's a huge undertaking, and I really appreciate it because it's an underpinning of the community, and it takes a lot of work because you're dealing with people, and I don't know how much you guys deal with people. Sometimes they're not great. So, the last month has been a huge whirlwind for me. My son got married 2 weeks ago, which I'm insanely proud about. And then the last few months have been crazy because I was a senior engineer at Frame, went through a review cycle, got a double promotion to senior staff, then Adobe bought us, and then I moved on to Shift 5 as a principal engineer. So between career and family, things are going like, it's just a whirlwind. Because I have 5 kids, my youngest is 17, my oldest is 26, so you can imagine they're like adults now doing things. So. But this talk is very applicable to what I'm now doing, which I didn't know I was going to be doing when I first submitted the talk. I'm a teacher by trade. If you ask me what I was made to do, it would be teach. It went to software for the money, let's be clear. So this talk here is very applicable to what I'm doing now, even though I didn't know this is what I was going to be doing when I wrote the what do you call it, proposal. So I went to Shift 5, and now we've got to reassess the entire stack and figure out what we want to build it in, how we're going to build our product, all of these things. As I go through this, I might mention some things from Shift 5. We work on military vehicles like F-35s and Stryker vehicles and airlines and rail and this type of thing. So if anything I say sounds interesting, we're hiring, come see me. I'm going to talk now, just to give you a little bit of my bias, I really hate political organizations. Now you're going to think, is she talking about Republicans or Democrats? Nope. To me, political organizations they use power of social networking and titles to kind of achieve benefits to individuals in the organization. I don't find them healthy, and so I will rail against them like for the next 30 minutes. Just here you go. Also, Wednesday night at Austin Skate Rink, there's an adult night. If you've never been to an adult night, it's worth going, even if you don't want to strap on skates. I will be there. Now, this is Atlanta Golden Glide on a Friday night, but you get the idea. So as we get into this talk, and I start talking about giving people time, giving individual contributors time for adoption, I want you to keep in mind that a week of planning could save you months of development time. Now, you might want to ask yourself, is it worth it for you to take that week so you can save months of time? And if you're there, it's because your business most likely is operating under tyranny of the urgent, and you're getting swung around from one thing to the next thing because you're like having to answer business needs, everything's in urgency, and you are unable to be tactical versus strategic. In a situation where you have business pressures, where they're not giving you time to do things, if you undertake a new thing, it will only make it worse. So if you haven't worked out the business side to manage their expectations, it's not going to be great for you. So when I join an organization, I look around at what's burning. Whatever has been making the most smoke, wherever the most fire is, that's generally where I want to be dropped into. Because I kind of like fancy myself like a wildfire firefighter, getting dropped in, sometimes having to deal with a bunch of stuff on my own because it's just technically on fire. So when I come into an organization, I'm trying to find those highest leverage fires. Now, in my experience, people problems are your highest leverage fires. And developers want to go after the tech problems, but the people problems are huge. Now, leadership and management, they're supposed to be solving these problems. And my experience isn't always that they want to. Sometimes they want to ignore them. So when you have a lot of people problems, this generally indicates a very political org. And when I do this, the floor squeaks. So it's going to throw me off a little bit if you hear it, because I'm a walker when I'm talking. So if your leadership or management isn't solving, It gets me every time. Sorry, I've been squeaking up here. So if you have a lot of people problems, that indicates a lot of politics. And a lot of politics means danger. So if you're okay with being dropped into this type of situation, then you might want to engage with those people problems. But if you're in management or you're in leadership, solving the people problems, that's your job. And you need to get it done if you want your organization to be able to adopt Elixir successfully. Now, if you're higher up on the technical ladder where you have a title that might give you more sway, you could possibly engage safely with these things. If you're a junior dev or maybe new to the industry, you should stay away from them. They're dangerous for your career. And I mean, we could talk about all the right things that you could do, but the world's full of people, and sometimes people suck. So just beware. So what happens when people naturally want to solve problems? When people join an organization, they want to fix things, they want to make progress, they want to solve problems. What happens when your problems are mostly people problems? Well, they find a problem to solve, but it's not the problem you need to solve. So they'll go after things that they know how to do. When people are presented with ambiguous situations or a situation which makes them feel like they don't understand what's going on, they're going to try and make that situation as something they've dealt with before so they can feel more comfortable with it. So they're going to go after lower leverage things. But make no mistake, if your org has people problems, tech solutions will not fix them. So when you think about adopting Elixir by your organization, if you're thinking of this as a technical decision, then you might not be solving the most important problem to solve. Elixir can solve problems, and lots of them, but it's not going to solve your people problems. You need to get in front of those. So, problems that Elixir doesn't solve. When you're not building the right thing, many of us have been in lots of companies where they're trying to make a product and they're just simply not building the right thing. It's not going to sell, or it doesn't have product market fit. If building an Elixir doesn't fix any of that, it might make you feel like you're making progress, but you're not fixing the fundamental problem. Some organizations are unable to define domain concepts, so that when product says a word and engineering says a word, neither one of them are actually saying the same concept. They're different concepts. Going to Elixir won't fix that. If product people cannot make problem statements like, user wants to do this, like this is the problem the user is trying to solve, how do we solve it? If they can't make a problem statement, moving to Elixir will not help you. And this one's my favorite, the Peter principle. If your organization has problems with the Peter principle, moving to Elixir will not help you. If you have people that started early on with a startup and then just went from like senior director to VP to senior VP, that's a true story, and they're not really competent, but they have the titles, switching to Elixir won't fix the fact that your organization is not really able to manage performance on the management side. If your organization has business pressure to just churn out features, or you're unable to prioritize tech debt, switching to Elixir is not going to fix that. It's just going to add more work onto your plate. Then you have communication failures. Do you have multiple teams and you're unable to talk across the teams? Well, that's an indicator of poor communication because you're not managing the expectations. So moving to Elixir won't fix that. If there's an inscrutable decision-making process, like engineering decisions are made, you have no idea how it happened, you have no idea the constraints they considered in making the decision, switching to Elixir won't fix that either. If there's a lack of psychological safety, there's no language that will fix that. And if you have an inscrutable organizational API, meaning people just simply don't know how to get things done on your team or in your organization, switching to Elixir might make them happy because they're getting something done. But in the end, it really won't help you deliver the product that's going to make you the money. Because inherently incompetent people want to leave things undefined, because when they're undefined, they're unaccountable for them. They can spin that situation. So pushing organizations to define expectations, define APIs. This scene, by the way, is from Coneheads. I don't know if you haven't seen it. David Spade basically works himself up to any leader he can and becomes the person always passing information to the leader so that now he's important. It's kind of the definition of a political org in my mind. So if this is what's happening and you have no definition, which means you have no accountability for your leadership, then trying to switch to Elixir to fix that, it won't fix it. Another thing about communication is that in our culture today, we have a lot of engagement with arguments. in unhealthy ways. We're unable to deal with disagreement. We're unable to base our debate on facts or persuade. Instead, we tend to set up straw men. And you see it happen all the time, like on social media and the news. People aren't really debating the meat of the subject. Instead, they set up some kind of ridiculous argument and then just knock it over. This is something that I've seen creep into tech as well. When I'm in discussions, you'll see people, I really have very little respect for other engineers that will strip all the interesting parts of a solution out, set it up as a straw man, and then knock it over. And in the end, it's really damaging for your organization, because if you can't respect someone else's idea and engage with it healthy, then you're not really respecting that person. And so it makes it difficult. So like this, where our culture is in communication, it's going to seep into your organization. Even if your organization is super healthy, you have to be on the lookout for this stuff. But the big one is lack of vision. I've seen this a ton, because oftentimes in engineering organizations, when you don't have, as an IC, if you don't have confidence that leadership understands the problems you're solving, understands where they want to take it, understands all the considerations involving that problem, and then makes a path forward, well, that's vision, and people can follow that. But if they're not doing that, if you don't have that confidence, then it's going to be hard for you to follow, and it's going to be hard to lead your team. So make sure that you have a very clear vision, and that you're pushing that vision down to your devs. Because leaders don't lead lines of code. We don't lead 9 nines. We don't lead repos. We lead people. And when people try and take the tech industry and make it about tech, it's fair and wrong, because as soon as you remove the people from the tech, you don't have an industry anymore. So we're going to go over some tips for change. Like, how do you prepare your organization for any change, whether that's a change in process, language, team structure, anything. Well, first, you want to address psychological safety, because psychological safety is always important. But when you're trying to change the way someone thinks or change something they do, it's nearly impossible if the people are self-conscious about their status. Because psychological safety at the end is being able to talk openly without worrying about damaging your status within the team. Like, if I expose that I don't know something, will it damage my status within the team? If you haven't prepared your team with psychological safety, adopting anything new will be difficult. Because people have to work through new concepts and play with ideas, and they have to interrogate the ideas. They have to ask questions about them. That's what we do. Like, when you pick up a Rubik's Cube, you turn it over in your hand, you're asking questions. What does this look like on the other side? What happens if I flip this? You're asking questions of the problem in your hand. And people have to have time to do that. And sometimes when you're first playing with something, you're going to do things that are kind of like, you look back, you're like, oh, that was silly. No, it wasn't silly when you started learning, because you didn't know it. You had to ask the question in order to get the answer, to realize, oh, this is basic. Awesome, moving on. So psychological safety is number one. Then you want to pick an organizational strategy. Now, I put these books up here because this could be one way you pick an organizational strategy for adopting Elixir. We're going to follow these books and how they think about things. But it's really difficult for new people to pick up a new thing, oh, so sorry, and start using it. So what you want to do is give a portion of your devs, maybe a tiger team or something like that, ability to run forward and explore the language, explore the ecosystem, figure out what things might be helpful, try and narrow the cone of uncertainty on this new adventure. And as they narrow that cone of uncertainty, it's important that you remember they need to throw away their prototypes. Do not send people out on a tiger team to explore it and then say, oh, we're done, we've adopted it. Here we go, we got some prototypes that work. I'm talking about they're building an internal product for your organization. They're building the roadmap to get your developers from where they are to where you want your developers to be. And if you don't have people that you want to send off on that mission, and you're going to hire in, that's great. There are a lot of technical people out there that know a lot about Elixir, and they will offer huge benefit to your org. But do not bring someone in just based on that. If they do not have people skills that are verified from external sources besides their own mouth, do not hire them. The last thing you'll want to do is to manage expectations, for your ICs especially. They need to have time where they're not expected to just produce lines of code, because they have to learn. And when people are under heavy stress, their brain literally stops working. Like, I don't know if you've read many studies about how people react under fear and how they just can't think. You'll see people do crazy stuff when they're afraid, and you're like, well, I would have just done this. Well, of course you would have, if you didn't have all the fear going on in your head. So it really changes how you interact with the problem and how you learn when you're afraid. So you want to make sure you're managing those expectations, because you want to help the developers have a nice, calm mindset as they're heading into this adoption. because telling people to manage their stress and learn something, it's kind of setting them up for failure. And this kind of comes down to the argument of, is software engineering art or science? Well, if it's science, then you can say the process to learn Elixir should take you 2 weeks and 3 days. And the process to learn Phoenix should take you 4 days. And then you should be done. Or is it art? It's really hard to tell how people learn. So let's talk about that a little bit. How do we learn? I'm a classically trained teacher, and that's what I did for decades before becoming an engineer. I homeschooled my 5 kids, and they're all now have, all of them, less one has an associate's degree, so we're doing okay. But the very first stage of learning is poll parrot. Poll parrot is when people recite facts. They memorize things. And I don't know if y'all in 2nd grade had to take the time test like I did in Mr. Todd's class at Talmadge Elementary School. But had to take those time tests, learn my multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, all of that. And that's poll parrot stage, where you're just memorizing things. Then you get into the logic stage. This is when you're like middle schoolers, you know how they argue with you? That's kind of like it. They're learning the rules of how to engage, and they're not really pretty about it, but they engage, and they're learning the rules, and they want to get down, like they get really sophomoric and stuff. And then finally, you hit the rhetoric stage. And the rhetoric stage is when you're able to persuade people, when you're able to have deeper conversations. Now, the reason why I'm going over this is because if you try to learn a new language and hit the rhetoric stage right out of the bat, you're going to feel the need to talk about things you don't know about with a lot of opinions, and that's dangerous for an organization. So give yourself time to move up through whatever you're adopting, whether it's Elixir, whether it's a framework. Give yourself time to work up through the learning period of the rote facts, learning the rules, and then being able to articulate. And if you're hanging around, if you're in a senior position, or you've been around and you learned a bunch of things, you'll know that asking questions is important for learning. You might have a bug come up, and you'll be talking about it, and you'll run into someone, and they'll ask a question, and the question shows what the actual problem is. Oh, like, you know, what is this setting set to? And you're like, oh, well, it was set to the wrong thing. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's what the fix is. And you're like, well, how did you know that? Well, it's because they have a better question bank that they ask when they are debugging things, because their experience has given them this question bank to ask every time they encounter something. So asking questions is important for learning. And if you have junior developers on your team, or people that are coming up, pairing them with someone who's older, or having someone who's older, not older, but more experienced, go through and share the questions they're asking. For example, when I'm learning a language, okay, is this passed by value? Is this passed by, you know, like you want to know, is it being copied, or is it mutable in the end? Or how does this work, or how does that work? I'm asking questions at a level because I've interacted with different frameworks, and so I'm going to ask questions based on those learnings of how the frameworks are different, and does this thing match something I already know, that type of thing. So I have different questions, and when you hang out with people that maybe are a little not quite as far along in their career as you, what you can do for them is help grow their question bank. Ask your questions out loud for those people so they understand what you care about, because you're asking a question about it, and what the actual answer is. Now, more experienced devs do tend to have better questions, and they learn faster due to this, because they're able to interrogate the new concept better with the question bank they have. And so then the question comes down, why do devs have such different question banks? Well, it could be because they have just the number of years of general experience in engineering. It could be the amount of domain experience they have. Maybe it's just simply their life experience. I've not been an engineer for a super long time, but I bore and raised 5 children, and that taught me a lot of lessons, and that does affect my engineering. And then how many tire fires have they handled? How many times are they dealing with just code, a repo that's just a mess? Because that teaches you a ton. And how dead are they on the inside? You know, because basically all these fires kind of do that to you. So if you're on the beginner end of things and you're wanting to know how to up your game, oh, I'm off, okay. Fight some tire fires. Die a little bit on the inside. So now I'm going to give you some specific tips for Elixir adoption. First, you'll want to socialize the good stuff. Basically what you're doing is you're handing people a new tool, and that new tool has new methods and ways of getting things done, right? You want to socialize the things that really differentiate it, things that make it really great at solving your problems, because you want your devs to know those things that Elixir is really good at, immutability, for example, or data mutability, and how they can use that then as they're developing. But if you're not socializing that, they might forget about it. Because remember, these are new concepts if you're just adopting them, and so you're going to want to socialize it and talk about it. That way when a dev sees, oh, this problem is really a problem with state, or like with mutability. Wait a minute, Elixir's really good at immutability. How will we solve this now? Recursion is another one that you're going to want to go over, because I think as an experienced JavaScript developer, I've blown the stack plenty of times. So just knowing that the recursion's there and it's a tool in the toolbox is good for new people. The Beam and Erlang, if you don't understand what those are doing for you in production or just in development, then it's going to be hard to utilize all those benefits. Concurrency, most frameworks can't handle the just sheer number of connections or concurrency that's running in Elixir. And if you're not used to dealing with that level of concurrency, it can be hard to really leverage it to your benefit. The growing ecosystem of Elixir, there's a lot of libraries out there, so people don't need to feel like they are going to have to reinvent the wheel on everything. Testing is a first-class citizen, which is really nice. They don't have to make a choice there. It's not like you're going to JavaScript and you're going to like pick one of 100,000 testing frameworks. Documentation's a first-class citizen, as well as instrumentation. All of these things you want to push down to the devs so they understand the tools that are there in the new language to support them. On the business side, sometimes reminding them that they're going through this pain because it requires fewer devs to sometimes accomplish the same goal, or that maybe it requires fewer or less hardware. Maybe you can save cost there. Basically, socializing all the good reasons that you're going through this journey. Then you'll want to socialize the pitfalls. And it's important to remember that when you're socializing pitfalls, you really can't police people. You can warn them that the pitfall exists, and hopefully they'll then be looking out for it. But you can't actually make sure they don't fall into the pit. The big one is functional versus object-oriented. You'll see this a lot where you have developers who have many, many years in object-oriented languages, and what they've done is they've built up lots of handy solutions. This is the problem. I know how to solve this. I've solved this 10 times in object-oriented ways. And so they'll reach for the object-oriented solution, and that's really detrimental. They have to realize, anyone that picks up Elixir has to realize this doesn't work like object-oriented stuff. And if you're thinking about it in that way, you're not going to be as successful. So pushing the functional part of Elixir down to the bottom, especially when you're talking about object-oriented devs switching over to functional, that's a challenge, but everyone needs to be reminded that it's a common pitfall, that they're going to slide that direction. So that when they do it, it's not that they're a bad person. It's just that they stepped in the pit. Come on out. Next one is when you combine ignorance and insecurity, it makes a very deadly combo, most likely resulting in ego, or maybe extra strong opinions because it makes you feel better, or maybe terse communication because you're a little edgy. Letting people know that it's going to be uncomfortable to learn something new, especially depending on how far they're backing up, and preparing them that they're going to have, it could change how they interact with their coworkers or how they interact with the subject. You can't stop them from doing it, but if they know it's there, they'll see it when it starts, and hopefully they'll just fix it on their own. Another problem that happens is that it can be hard to see the big picture when you're adopting lines of code. So maybe this is going to solve a concurrency problem, and it's going to make your front end faster, because now you can use live view to update all the things. It can be really hard to see that beautiful end when you're learning how to add a key to a map, or you're learning how to iterate over a list. These type of things you lose track of them. You need to remind people that you are moving towards something better, and to keep that in mind as you're moving forward, so that they're not lost and just like, this is now I have to learn a new language. Learning's the great and horrible thing about being a software engineer. The great thing is you're always learning. The bad thing is you're always learning. So it gets tiresome, right? And another thing you have to be aware of is strong opinions loosely held. Most people will say this. Everyone, I don't know. I don't know any engineer that won't say this line. I'm less convinced that most of them understand it. So I see that they have strong opinions. It's not quite as clear whether or not they're loosely held. And I have absolutely no idea how they got there. So strong opinions loosely held is great if you're basing your opinions on facts or data or foundational principles. So if you have data, you have facts, great. Or it could be something like, I'm going to just go with dry. Most people are familiar with dry, don't repeat yourself. We're doing it like this because we accept dry. That would be acceptable as well. But when you have a strong opinion that's not based in facts or principles, something that you can engage with, that's an indicator of a political organization. Because now if you question or you push back on that, it's not about the technical merits of what you're suggesting. It's about the fact you just poke someone in the eye. So strong opinions loosely held, I think, is an important statement, with the caveat that most people, I'm not convinced, understand it. So there's that. Another thing you'll want to do is adopt a common approach. And the reason why you're doing this is because you've got a pool of people. Let's say you've got a pool of 12 developers, and they're all going to be working with you through this. You want to give them common experience so they have something to compare and talk about. Because if you're not giving them a common experience, then when they have to download so much context to get a coworker able to engage in the conversation. So a common approach would be, for example, picking a book list. The book list that I've so far chosen is Programming Elixir and then Programming LiveView, which we have an author sitting right here in the front row. And the reason I love these books because they allow me to stop bike shedding. They are opinionated enough to give you a path forward, and opinionated enough to help settle some bike sheds that you get into, because what you do not want to do is head down this big adoption and then get mired up in details of bike sheds. And so if you start early on and say, okay, we're going to use these books and we're going to think like these books think, until we have enough experience to go back and revisit, do we think like these books think? And then you can all recircle around the same pool of knowledge and figure out how you want to proceed. So having a recommended book list or a recommended approach of how you're going to tackle something, and then also making sure that you have created a way to resolve bike sheds early on before there's any emotions involved, before one person wants to do one thing and one person does another. If you just say, hey, we're just going to resolve bike sheds this way out of the gate, and then we'll reassess them later on, then that kind of like diffuses the situation and helps you move forward. Another thing you want to do is take on challenges early. With Shift, Shift 5, when I started trying to see, will this work for what we're doing? One of the big concerns I had is, can I do chart display and chart update in the framework? Do I have a path forward for that? And I wanted to take on that challenge because I didn't want to get down the road and then realize one of the core features that I have to deliver, I can't. So it's important to take on those challenges early. Like, how are you going to deploy that? Don't leave it as this question mark that makes people uncomfortable because we haven't conquered it yet. Do a simple, like, spike. Can I deploy this? Can I update charts? Can I do this? Okay, we have the big things there, now let's go do it. Now, the tendency is that you're going to think of the work that you're doing at that point, and you're not going to think of it like this. I don't want to redo you. I chose the picture of the cheapest possible paper plate I could get because I don't want to reuse those. And when you're doing this work, do not reuse it. Do not do a prototype spike and then say, well, this is good enough for production, and then kind of cargo called it in and then go from there. Learn, throw it away, because the benefit of the prototype isn't the paper plate in the end. The benefit of the prototype is you understanding more about how it's built so you can do it again better. But if you start flirting with the idea that you're going to build the right thing out of the gate, you're going to end up keeping your paper plate around, and that's dangerous because it ends up being like a lot of tech debt in the end. Another concern you have to be thinking about is hiring, because Elixir is a growing community, but if you want to hire new devs, that could be possibly difficult depending on how you're approaching it. Now, ideally, your pipeline would be churning out competent devs. I have less confidence that pipelines are actually able to always find the good devs. Interviewing is a hard problem to solve. But one suggestion I can make is this way that you're onboarding your devs now into Elixir, or the way that you're already teaching them, this book list and this common approach, this is the basis of how you can onboard future devs, so that you can just find competent engineers and then show them the same road. Oh, by the way, we read these books, we did it this way, we followed this blog, we did this thing. And at the very least, they understand where you're coming from. And if they're starting with no experience, they can follow right in your path and then engage with your other developers with the same content, because they didn't go off and do something different. Now, if they do have experience and they have opinions already, great. But now they're going to know where you're coming from, so they're going to understand where to engage with you on. You're also going to want to make time for developer experience, because nothing's more painful in an organization than being the 15th person to say, I just wasted a day and a half on this problem. And then the developer says, couldn't management see that this was going to be a problem for everybody after the 6th person hit it? Why are they letting us waste our time this way? So if you want to build trust in management and leadership, make sure you make time for developer experience, because it saves a ton of time long term. And then the other thing to remember is that there are majors and minors. Now, as a parent, how this works out is I had 4 kids by the time I was 26, and my 5th before I turned 30. So I had a lot of very young kids Best years of my life, hands down. I would go back and do them again over a career any day. Just loved it. But, I mean, it was hard work, don't get me wrong. I was super tired all the time, which made me a little salty. But it's okay, it was still really good. One thing you learn is you don't make rules that you're unwilling to enforce. Because if you make rules you're unwilling to enforce, now the kids aren't sure which rules they have to follow. So the tendency here is that we like to do things that we're used to doing because it makes us comfortable. And making rules about small things makes us comfortable. But as an organization, if you're not going to enforce those rules, then don't make them, because then it really confuses people on what's important to you and what's not. So make sure, especially as you're starting out, that you really make it clear what the big things are, and really let the little things go, because that assures that you're on target. And yes, you've got little things to work on along the way and little conversations to have. But if you make rules about everything, or if you try to overly prepare, engineers are smart. They want to be treated like they're smart, which means they don't want you to tell them how to make the little decisions. They want you to tell them how to make the big decisions, because it helps them understand how everyone's going to make the little decision the same way. And so if you treat them like they're children, or you try to make these little rules that you're not going to enforce, it does really make them question what is going to be enforced, what is the major, what is the minor. And again, like I said, making sure you have some way of resolving bike sheds before you start the process, because they're going to come up and you don't want to waste a lot of time on them, because it's just, it's not a high value proposition. Now, the last 32 minutes I've talked about my experience and how I see it, but I'm going to give you a beginner's perspective. So this person is my child, and when she was 12, I decided to set up a table. I'm sorry, I'm going to clear my hair out of this mic. No, I'm not. I'm just leaving it there. When she was 12 and her younger sister was 8, I set up a table upstairs in the TV room. We put 2 Macs there, and I started teaching them how to use the command line. And my kids are really tiny, so they look like, yeah, they're 12 and 8, but they more look like 6 and 4. And so I'm teaching them, okay, now go into this directory, okay, now make a file, now do this, now go up a directory. And I remember at one point, Kate looked up at me and she goes, "Mom, I feel so smart." She feels really smart because she's looking at this black terminal and she's able to navigate it, and it's amazing. This is just a note that you have kids and you want them to go this direction. Take away the mystery of those screens. And now Kate's going to come up here and walk through a couple slides with us. Meryl, is this? There you go.
Good? Okay. By the way, when I got to college, terminals didn't scare me, because when I was 12, I played with them with my mom.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to step this way. So just hit the arrow when you want to go up, and I'll step this way where I'm behind you. There you go.
All right, some fast things about me, so you can maybe
put your mic close to your mouth.
I have 4 siblings. That's probably why I talk so loud when we're in groups. But yes, 2 older brothers, one just got married, an older sister and a younger sister. That's my younger sister right here. We're like best friends, so I couldn't do this presentation without her face being up there. She would be mad. Then I was homeschooled through high school. I started attending college courses when I was 16. When I was 20, I got my BA in computer science. And then a fun fact is that I like to play a lot of sports. I played volleyball and basketball in high school. In college, I started doing cross country. I picked up disc golf. I love spike ball. You name a sport, I could probably play it with you and learn it fast. So you'll notice I went to college 2 years sooner than a lot of my peers. And so I thought, I'm going to finish college. I'm going to feel like I'm on top of the world. That is quite the opposite, okay? Finish college.
Hit the slide.
I'm going to. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, it's probably a mom.
Yeah. I had no job, and I had no projects to show to recruiters, because I switched computers, so I lost all my previous projects. And yeah, so I was confused, frustrated, didn't know what to do, didn't know how to get a job. I had a degree, and that's not all employers want to see, apparently. So I resolved to develop a product, and I started, after talking to my mentor, we decided that not to do it in Ruby on Rails, which I had experience in, but to do it on Elixir. So I started learning Elixir. My journey began. My mentor recommended Programming in Elixir by Dave Thomas. that gave me a good foundation and mindset towards Elixir and how you're supposed to think differently about it and the syntax. That was a very helpful basis. Then I got a little impatient, wanted to develop an app, did a quick intro project, and moved on to Programming Phoenix in LiveView. By the way, this has been one of the best programming books I have read, and Sophia deserves a round of applause on that. Sophie, my bad. I don't know how to pronounce your last name. Okay, we'll work on that later. These books and projects would have been difficult to understand and process as much as I did if it wasn't for regular discussions with my mentor. I learned a lot in the books, and when I'd get stuck sometimes on simple syntax errors or concepts like pattern matching, I talked to my mentor, who is my mom. That helped me get a long way, learn faster, and make me feel more comfortable. One thing that she said in her talk is that Phoenix is so close to Rails that it opens the door to cargo cult object-oriented concepts. When she said this, alarms went off in my head because Elixir is not object-oriented, and I know that. Everybody should know that Elixir is functional and not object-oriented. Why would they think of it as so? And I realized because I read Dave Thomas's book, the beginning emphasizes how it is functional and you need to think about it differently, and the concept of object-oriented should kind of be pushed out as you're trying to program in Elixir. So because of that firm basis that was set with the books, I now am not confused about this, and I never have been ever since I started programming in it. So my mom is right, though, because when I started doing Phoenix, the contexts were confusing me, and I was starting to think about it in object-oriented. But when I did that, alarms went off in my head and said, "You're wrong, stop that." So those are two notes on points that my mom made. Now, when you're onboarding and trying to learn Elixir, choosing a mentor, someone who's been there, done that, most important thing with a mentor is psychological safety. She mentioned that. I've been to college. I've been in a program where I didn't have as much experience as the ones around me, and I felt pushed around. I got really sick, and then I tried to recover from that. As I was recovering, I would lose sleep, and then I'd get sick again after I caught up. So that was weird. But the reason I was struggling so much is because I couldn't ask questions, and I felt like if I ask a question, they're going to think I don't know anything and that I'm stupid. Which now I have a mentor who obviously is better than me, and I can ask her whatever questions, but she doesn't make me feel stupid. An example of this was the other day, we were working through Chapter 1 on Phoenix LiveView, and I was trying to develop something to update the assign method in the socket. Well, there was a rocket hash, and I called it
hash rocket.
A hash rocket. I still don't know it. I called it a rocket ship because it looked like a rocket ship. And my mom stops, puts her hand on my shoulder, and she says, "Did you just say rocket ship?" And she corrected me. She walked 10 feet away laughing hysterically and then came back.
That doesn't make it sound like it's psychologically safe.
It is.
I'm just saying.
Yes. It was funny. It was funny. And then, but I'm talking about people who'd be like, "You don't know that? How do you not know this?"
That's true.
That's just not nice. But yes, so this has been my experience with these books, my mom's way of doing things, and
Stay in front of me.
I'm going to stay in front of you. And that was a short story about my experience with her. So.
And I realized she left out context when she talked about getting sick. What happened was in the beginning of 2020, she got double pneumonia and was gravely ill, almost had to be hospitalized, which meant that she was starting the second semester of her junior year at NC State. It was a mess of a semester for so many reasons between COVID and her getting gravely ill. So anyway, just to provide context. Takeaway is Miki Rez on Twitter. Engage questions, comments, anything there, and make sure you're hashtagging the conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miki. Thank you, Kate. That was so incredible. I have a million questions for both of you, and I can't wait to talk more. We are going to take... Oh, please.
You never asked me if I was Team Jacob or Team Edward.
Well, interesting that you went in a Twilight direction with it,
I
because
have
we
3
just
daughters.
cast a very generic... Care to answer the question? Oh, we forgot a question for her. Answer this one, and I'll give you a new one, too.
The Jacob Edward question?
Yeah, vampires or werewolves?
Werewolves.
Interesting. Okay, interesting. Follow-up. I'm thinking of it because it's totally in my brain. Ghosts or zombies?
What?
Ghosts or zombies?
Zombies.
Interesting.
I like to kill things.
Fascinating, fascinating, and perhaps not surprising. All right, thank you, Miki. Thank you, Kate.